Resident Evil 4 Remake is so good. This was definitely one of my most anticipated games of the year. I've been excited for weeks, especially when the demo came out. So I downloaded the game at midnight when it came out, and then proceeded to play it non-stop until the sun came up. And after about sinking 20 hours into the game, I think I can safely say that Resident Evil 4 Remake might just be my game of the year. I know, a pretty ballsy thing to say when it's only March, but I mean it. This game is nearly perfect. I owe a lot to Resident Evil. My video on the remakes of 2 and 3 was kind of my first successful video, and I reviewed those games as someone who has never played any Resident Evil game. Since then, I've become a pretty big fan and have consumed a lot more Resident Evil content, but I wanted to have the same experiences as I did when I played those 2 remakes, so I decided not to play the original Resident Evil 4. I'm not 100% in the dark, but I went in pretty blind. Also, for this review, I will start with no spoilers, but then get into spoiler territory at the end, but I will warn y'all beforehand. Also, most of the content I will be showing you is from the beginning of the game, and there will not be any too spoilery scenes being shown off, but I did record this footage on New Game Plus, so there are a few items in my inventory that are late game, but those aren't too spoilery. But first, let's talk about gameplay. Leon has a little bit more weight this time around, and at first you think he's moving a little sluggishly, but his mobility actually feels just right when you put yourself in combat. This time around, he can do a couple of jukes along with a slightly faster jog, but he can also do skull-crushing and knee-shattering wrestling moves to decimate his enemies if you've stunned them. All gorgeously animated and absolutely brutal. I'm surprised Leon didn't crush someone's head with his thighs at one point. That's a request. Modders, please make this. And the animations never go stale. Leon goes through multiple animations depending on how you stun them. They feel so sick to pull off. But of course, it's not Resident Evil if you're not pulling out the blicky on the most powerful monsters on the planet. And oh boy, the guns have never felt better. I'm always looking for a game that makes gunplay feel different and fun, and Resident Evil 4 goes above and beyond with every single one of its weapons. Every single gun feels different to shoot and absolutely beautiful to listen to. It really feels like each gun has its own use in your arsenal, and when you figure out the perfect loadout, it feels like you can take on a whole country. But the good guns only take you so far, as you'll have to use all of your skills to make it through these evil residents. The game is pretty hard. Now, I'm not someone who shies away from a challenge, but this game is definitely way harder than the first 2 remakes. Enemies hit harder, think smarter, and fight together in order to kill Leon. You have to be cautious of your surrounding 24/7, because you will absolutely die from something you won't see. Enemies particularly spread out, so unless you're in a corner, you have to assume someone's behind you. The amount of times I was absolutely blindsided by an enemy that I didn't even know was behind me is far too many to count. Almost as much as the amount of bear traps I got stuck in. Whoever designed the bear trap in this game and where to put them is an absolute maniac. Luckily, Leon has one more giant tool in his arsenal, and that is his knife. The knife system in this game it's so good. The idea that you can parry almost every attack is such a genius and easy way to get around QuickTime events. And it feels so hype when you get a perfect parry. I legit wouldn't shoot someone on a 1v1 encounter just so that I could get that sweet parry. I mean, listen to this shit. That's some good ASMR. Honestly, when I got to the merchant, my main priority was to level up the durability of my knife, cause I used it so much. And speaking of the merchant, he is absolutely perfect, and buying and upgrading equipment felt extremely well paced. The game has a treasure system, and it was really fun backtracking and looking for gems and treasure to sell. Everything about the money system felt incredibly rewarding. And to go back to the knife really fast, the game is so smart with it, forcing specific encounters where you're either forced to or rewarded for parrying. Speaking of which, the bosses are incredibly fun. Some are definitely better than others, but all of them made me use my brain and had my heart racing. Specifically, the Krauser fights will definitely go down in history as some of the best boss battles ever created. Now, I have been saying a lot of good things and I don't want to be a shill, so I do have to mention that the puzzles in this game definitely felt a little lackluster, especially when compared to 2 Remake. It's definitely because you can tell that wasn't the focus this time around. I mean, this was an action game, but there's a specific puzzle in the lab portion of the game that had to have been designed by a madman. I don't think I have ever been that upset with a Resident Evil puzzle. But also, with that in mind, the entire Ashley section kind of made up for it. It was equal parts terrifying and challenging, and I was genuinely sad when it was over. And speaking of spooks, the spook factor of course is not as crazy here, but that doesn't mean that the game doesn't have its scares. The regenerators definitely made me shit myself at one point, and that's all I'll say on that. Overall, I think the gameplay is near perfect, with the action going a lot harder than ever and the upgrading system being airtight. But if there's one thing I can actually say is perfect in this game, that is the presentation. The polish on the presentation of this game is insane. The best way I can put it is that this game definitely looks expensive. With possibly hundreds of animations on enemies and dozens on Leon, they spared no expense here. And simply put, the game looks gorgeous. Recently, I haven't been feeling like new games are quite deserving of that next-gen title, but this game certainly feels like a push from things we've seen in the past 5 years. The footage you are seeing right now are with the graphics on performance mode, but even so, it still looks pretty great. When I did my run, I had the settings turned up, and I was blown away by how gorgeous everything was. Also, I had the ballistic option turned on, and when I killed my first regenerator, his ass jiggled when he fell, and I sat there like,
"What you doing out here with all this ass?"
Also, the faces in RE2 Remake were a bit odd, and you can tell they got a little bit better with Jill in RE3 Remake, but here, the faces look stunning. For all you Leon stans out there, this is definitely the best he has ever looked. I mean, look at this. If the president was actually smart, he would stop sending Leon to rule Spain to do covert ops and instead use him as marketing for our military. That's how you'll boost your recruitment numbers. Also, Ashley is really fucking cute, and she is definitely my newest favorite RE lady. As for the enemies, not only do they look great, but there is so much variety. Of course, this is partially due because the original had so much variety, but it's still really impressive. Since Leon is much more capable, they have to be more monstrous, and Capcom really put attention to detail. The Garrador was my favorite design. It was scary, sad, and incredibly fun to fight. The cutscenes are the real fucking deal. There was a moment when I was watching the first cutscene that happens in Chapter 2, and I was like, oh my god, this isn't an animated movie, I'm playing a video game. A good cutscene takes so many moving parts, from the mocap, to the acting, to the animating, to the comping, and it just, if any of those falls slightly short, a cutscene can look bad. And you can definitely tell Capcom really figured it out. And lastly, the music. This is definitely my favorite Resident Evil soundtrack. It's incredibly diverse. It has crazy techno horror music, sweeping heroic instrumentals, and eerie diegetic choir music that sounds straight out of Bloodborne. And for you OG fans, just know that there's a little surprise for you music-wise in one of the sections of the game. But that's all I'll say without sounding too much of a fanboy, so let's round it out with the story and characters. Don't worry, this isn't the spoiler part. I'll say what I can without spoiling too much. It seems like one of the biggest draws about Resident Evil 4 is how it's not afraid of being unabashedly corny, and I fully agree. The events of the game are dire and genuinely very frightening, and while I love a good grounded story and horror, it's actually so heartwarming to have Leon there saying some shit like "nighty night nights" after experiencing one of the most heart and pussy pounding battles I've ever fought. And it's never out of place. They kind of make it feel like this is Leon making the most out of a situation, and it feels like a real thing someone would do who has immense trauma. And it's not just Leon's one-liners. The sheer batshit crazy things you go through in this game make this a roller coaster of emotions. When the situation calls it to be a specific motion, the game nails it. Leon bantering with a character about the situation, the dialogue is on point where it's both fresh and corny. A dramatic scene where things feel all is lost. The game creates tension in an organic way where you really feel lost in your situation. A high-octane action scene that would make even Michael Bay come. Yeah, the game has that and more. Everything is blending perfectly and the game is extremely well paced. Resident Evil games thrive on replayability, and there's usually one section that I kinda dread a bit, but I thoroughly do not have a section in this game I dread. I mean, there's certainly situations that make me want to cry in anxiety, but in a good way. I will definitely be going on this adventure with Leon and Ashley multiple times. And that is my organic transition into characters. Leon has always been my favorite Resident Evil protagonist, and yeah, that's definitely not changing after this game. I like how they really hammer in that he's changed since Raccoon City, but they make it seem like it's a natural progression and you see the same characteristics as he did back in 2. He was always a headstrong, jump first, think second type of guy, but back then he just wasn't a borderline super soldier, so he would get his ass whooped. The only difference is that now, he's basically the winter soldier and can decimate an entire village, and has the confidence to do so. I gave a shout out to Nick Apostolides last time, but I will do so again here, cause dude, you are the definitive Leon Kennedy. You can tell he really took his time to think about how he would craft Leon's voice for 4, because he really talks like he's personally been through the shit Leon has. Truly an incredible performance. But onto Ashley. Ashley is a load of fun. They really found a balance of making her scared, but also not absolutely helpless. While she can't fight, never did I feel like she was in the way. But also, there was an organically crafted bond between Leon and Ashley that you feel as well, so maybe that's why I never really felt annoyed. Not to mention that they really build her character. She's a damsel in distress, but she has agency in the story. She's equally important to moving the plot forward, which is what so many of these stories gets wrong. Also, I mentioned it before, but she has the best Deuterogonist section of a video game I have ever played. I hate secondary character sections in a video game. But this one was loads of fun because they used it as an opportunity to give the game a small section that feels like the original Resident Evil experience. It was absolutely phenomenal. Another shout out to Genevieve Buckner because from the second you meet Ashley, Genevieve conveys so much about the character with every fiber of her performance. And it's not just the protagonists, all the secondary characters are wonderful as well. Sadler is a terrifying cult leader who is also the master of being theatrical. Salazar is a perfect little gremlin man who feels like a naturally good villain. Ada is fine. I like Ada, but I definitely like her more in 2. Krauser is straight up a Metal Gear character. He feels out of place, but at the same time, nothing really feels out of place in a Resident Evil game, and his fights are the most fun thing in the world, so I couldn't possibly care. And Luis, God, I love Luis. Talk about the most charming man put in a video game. I loved him from the second he was on my screen. Now, that's all I'll say without spoiling anything, so I'll give you a few seconds to click away, and let's talk spoilers. For the past few months, I saw so many tweets of people being like, oh man, I wonder how they're gonna do the Krauser fight, or are they gonna keep the Gundam, or I wonder how they'll improve on the island. And as someone who's never played the original, I was so confused on what they were talking about. But oh boy, when things came on my screen, I was like, is this what they're talking about? There are so many interesting things about this game because you can tell that so many gaming tropes came from the original RE4, so it's like when everyone and their mother has done a cabin level, how do you improve upon the original when you remake it? The answer? Well, you make the enemy AI actually smart, so you have to use your brain. Also, the environmental storytelling in this one is next level. I actually felt genuinely sad with every picture and journal entry I read. These people didn't deserve what happened to them, and the game litters little details that make it feel like this was a real town that got blindsided by this cult. The village section and the castle were definitely my favorite areas, but God, the island had some balls to the wall action set pieces. The second Krauser fight actually had me cheering in my seat. Going through his whack-ass Hunger Games gauntlet only to rematch the 1v1 knife fight had me so hyped. And then he turns into the main character from Prototype, and then that fight had me screaming. And then it ends on a truly emotional cutscene. It was incredible. They really nailed the emotion of all of the scenes. If you watch my content, you know that my biggest thing is acting and storytelling. And this game went the extra mile and actually got creative with the blocking of their scenes. Like, I've never seen anything like that Luis and Leon locked up scene. The way they moved and they talked just felt real. And at the end with Ashley and Leon in the lab, that was so incredibly well done. The entire relationship between Ashley and Leon was so good. Their dialogue felt appropriately intimate, which is important because I cannot believe she tries to smash in the original. The flirting is implied but never specified, and Leon becomes more of a role model position for Ashley, which I really like. The emotion and stakes of that scene had me sitting up from my seat. But interestingly enough, the one thing that took me out of a lot of cutscenes was sadly Ada. I do like that they casted her live-action counterpart, but if there is one thing casting directors have to learn is that there is a drastic difference between a voice actor and a screen actor. Just because someone can do one does not mean that they can do the other. But other than that, yeah, every scene really nails it on the head, and I could not fucking believe my eyes when Wesker came on my screen. My jaw immediately dropped, and then I burst into laughter, thinking about how they are going to get around the laughable, cartoonish racism of 5. Honestly, I might be hyping this game too much, but this is just my type of game. A dark game that doesn't take itself too seriously while also offering extremely fun and rewarding gameplay. As much as I love RE2 Remake, that game felt like the perfect thriller, but that's not always my thing. It's a delicious meal when I'm in the mood, but I have to be in the mood to enjoy it. Resident Evil 4 Remake feels like a comfort meal that I would enjoy at any time. You know, if that comfort meal meant suplexing zombie grandmas and knife fights with Metal Gear characters. But I think that's why people enjoy this game too. If the emotions I felt during this scene are what people felt when they played the original, there's no denying why it was a massive success. I mean, have you seen all of the memes people are making? Seeing everyone laugh and have fun with the game really added to my experience and was kind of like the cherry on top of it all. It's so interesting to play this game and going through the sections because you realize that the tropes you see were created because of the original. I like how it doesn't try screwing with what made it special in the first place, but also improving on its gameplay by adding the additions that people have added over the years since the original came out. Like, the weapon wheel, that's just the Last of Us weapon wheel, and the stealth is very much borrowed from Metal Gear and The Last of Us, which is crazy because The Last of Us literally exists the way it does because of the original RE4, and now the remake borrows from it. It's a cool cycle. But more than that, it truly feels like Resident Evil has perfected its formula and is churning out banger after banger. I truly feel like this might be my game of the year. Like, I'm the biggest Final Fantasy fan, but I don't even feel like Final Fantasy 16 can trump this game to me. So, if you've never played the original Resident Evil 4 or a Resident Evil game in the first place, I still highly encourage you to play this, because it might just become your newest hyperfixation, the way it became mine.